I am like a very calm, very sedentary person in my real life. But a second I step up on stage or I'm in front of the screen, it's like all that energy that I stored up is released. And I think I learned to do that by doing 8 shows a week on Broadway. You have to like kind of live like like a priest or a nun or something. You have to kind of like remove yourself from any situation that is going to deplete you of the finite amount of energy that you have within your body to give on stage, every performance.
Filmmaker Magazine presents Back to One with Peter Rinaldi.
Jeremy Jordan is an actor. On the occasion of the release of his new film, Spinning Gold, in which he plays Neil Bogart, he sat down with me on the Upper West Side of Manhattan to talk about the work. Is there a typical way that you like to begin your preparation process when you get a new role?
I think it evolves, So if you asked me that question 15 years ago, I would have a completely different answer. But as I've kind of gotten older, I think the first thing that I want to do when it's so funny because, well, this is a different conversation, but I see and read things all the time, and there's always auditions and things like that. And you approach an audition very differently than you approach an actual role that you, at least for me, that you're actually booking. But in terms of like having the role and knowing that I'm going to go do it, I try to read the script as many times as possible and try to, especially a script like this, which has a lot of time jumps and a lot of information, and it's not super linear and you get little bits and pieces. Yeah. And it's like, I was taught early on that everything you need is on the page. So you just kind of take everything from that. And so I just read so that I understand and know everything that's going to happen. That way, nobody can come at me and be like, well, actually, this page says that. So I'm just like, well, actually, I can tell you right now, it's this. Mm-hmm. So it's really just inform. And then if we're talking about screen, I try to really think about character and try to think about who this person is in relation to me, because I always think that starting from within is the best thing. So I will find things that I relate to with the character and sort of try to pull those out. And then I have to tuck some of them back in because then the character becomes too much like me. So yeah, in terms of starting, it goes different ways after that. But if we're talking about theater, which I do a lot of theater, I am very physical. So I have always had trouble like accessing really deep emotions within myself. I can fake it, I can put it on, I can put on a voice, I can make my face do things but getting like real things to come out has been historically something that I've always struggled with. And I always had lots of mental blocks. And so I was always kind of like pushing through those. And what I discovered when I was in school was that if I can find the physical body of this character and how they move and what their hands do and where they hold their tension, whether it's like in their chest, they're being, proud, you hold a lot of tension in your chest. You see a lot of males, especially, like they have, and me, they have a big chest and proportion to the rest of their bodies because they hold all of this tension up here. And they don't let emotion into their heart. And so they have this bulk around. Someone that's really open and emotional, they tend to have a lot of freedom in their upper body. And there's different kind of personalities that hold tension in different places. And I've always found that really fascinating. So I, take walks around, I have the script, and I try to I watch TV or I think about people that I know that might have similar characteristics to that person, and I kind of watch them and see how they move and where their tension is being held. And that's always a really exciting sort of in for me, because then I can unlock that emotion that sort of is evoked by holding your body in this particular state. So if something's a lot different than me, you know, or somebody's like really angry, or, you know, if you're playing someone that's, you know, has an evil or is just like super joyful, which I'm a happy-ish person, but I wouldn't say I'm super joyful. Like those are actually the hardest for me, because I like have to like breathe. I can't like, I have to like release tension. So that's kind of where I start, I guess.
It's so interesting just sitting here with you after watching this movie, and I don't see anything of Neil in this person I'm sitting with right now.
Oh, interesting.
And no one would even recognize you.
Well,
as
I don't
this person.
have the fro.
I don't think it's that. We got to talk about his voice, because it's not just about accent, right? It's about something about breath work that you're doing in it.
I'm very fortunate to have had access to a lot of interviews that he did, which is kind of hard. It's kind of hard to pull your character from interviews. You know, like I feel like me, Jeremy, like I'm pretty myself in interviews, and I try to be like as authentic as possible. But back in the 60s and 70s, Neil didn't even know who he was. He was constantly reinventing himself. And so he was always so conscious of the persona he puts out. Now, if you really watch these interviews, you'll see little moments where you'll see his brain kind of ticking, and he kind of like formulates, and then he'll get a little grin, and then he'll give you the perfect response. But, you know, he was almost always on some kind of drug, if not just marijuana or alcohol. And so he had a very relaxed kind of quality to his voice, and he's just sort of, his mouth was kind of just very chill, and he spread his vowels out. And so I just watched and listened to him. And I think that really informed a lot of my choices, especially during like the interview sections of the movie, because he's always putting that on, you know. The other thing that I found really helpful, aside from just watching videos of him, was I had the best resource of all, which was his son, Tim, was our writer-director. And as I worked with him more and more, I started to realize that he is very much his father's son. And all of these sort of little, you know, well, I guess you would call like meta moments would be happening, where something would happen in filming or in a conversation. And I was like, are we still in the show, in the script? Or is this, you're this weird like hybrid version of yourself and your father, and I can see all these little things. So then I started like taking little nuances from Tim and putting those into the character, because I could see where he got it from. I can imagine where he got it from. And you know, I did a lot. I relied a lot on him to tell me if I was going in the wrong direction.
And you feel like he was honest with you about that kind of stuff? Like it must be hard to be directed by the son of the dude you're playing.
I thought it would be, but it really was not. He was really, really, really collaborative, and he was really encouraging of any sort of route that I wanted to go down, because I don't think Tim was looking to produce carbon copies of any of these characters, you know, whether it was me or either of the two Whitman leads, Beth or Joyce, or any of the famous people, you know, like, you know, we took a very liberal approach on some of the, you know, artists, because he wanted to capture the essence of them, as opposed to like, this is exactly them, you know? So he gave us a lot of leeway and a lot of freedom to sort of create our own versions of the character, as long as we sort of maintained the integrity of their personality. You know?
Yeah. And I guess that was important. And that also leads me to say like that the problem I have with a lot of these, especially musical biopics, is like, is avoided in this film because of the looseness with which, you know, stories are told with. Meaning like, it's not like, it's almost like the very first story is like absurd.
It's absurd.
And I was like, wait. And then he says, nah, I know that wasn't like that. And so we get this feeling like it's just, this is going to be fun. This is not the way it happened necessarily to the T. Yeah. And it has fun with that.
And this movie is really all about, is about fun. And even though there is darkness and there's a lot of kind of despair, this guy, Neil, he spent every moment of his life, you know, swinging for the fences.
Yeah.
And you can only really do that if it's something that you just like can't not do.
Yeah.
And he couldn't not milk every moment of every second of his life, you know, essentially. I mean, he reinvented himself multiple times. He changed his name to fit whatever circumstance he was in, you know, until he finally settled on Neil Bogart. And what I was a little bit worried because we actually cut the first scene of the movie. The first scene of the movie was this really cool one shot that was like 3.5 minutes long, where we talk about going to the church where Hawkins and his choir, you know, first performed "Oh Happy Day," and it was in the middle of a airline strike or something, and nobody could get anywhere, and everybody wanted this record. And he's like, I'm gonna figure out a way to get there. And you don't see his face. It's like this disembodied voice. And at the very end, you kind of see him, and then he pops into the church. But then, as you talked about, the church, the very first scene of the movie is dramatized, so to speak. Like it's his sort of fantastic version of what happens, but that's the entrance to the movie. You're like, I first watched it, I was like, wait, you're starting with this? I was like, this looks like I'm just going over the top. Like, why am I singing with this choir? People are going to be like, what am I watching? And then immediately after that, he's like, that's not really how it happened. You know, and then you kind of have the idea that any moment in this film, he can sort of go somewhere, and maybe it's true, maybe it's not. And we do that, and it kind of bookends in that way as well.
Right.
But it was really fun to kind of let go of like total reality.
Yeah.
And I'd never gotten to narrate anything before either, which
that must have been hard. I was thinking about that.
You know, we added a lot of it late because there was more narration and less of like seeing me. The first version of the script, I want to say, you only saw me talking like in little snippets. And I just remember one day while we were shooting, I would just get all these pages, and he's like, okay, we're gonna do all of the interview, what they call the interview scenes, kind of spliced throughout the movie. We're gonna do all of it today.
Wow.
And it was like 10 pages.
Wow.
Luckily, it was in little snippets, because I was like, I can't just like memorize 10 pages. Like,
and you also have nobody to play off of.
No, I didn't. But we kind of acted as if there was the camera was always in a very specific position, and I always looked just off the camera as if there was an interviewer sitting there.
Okay.
Then you kind of learn eventually that there's not an interviewer sitting there, but he's just let me have fun with it. So like we added little flash paper tricks, and we tried to keep it busy, and
he's always busy. Like that's the thing. He's always moving.
Yep.
I think the only time he's not moving is when he's seducing.
Tim often called him a perpetual motion machine. Like he has no ability to hold still. Even when he tries, it bursts out of him, you know.
But how did you make that organic? Because it was, you know what I mean? You've seen performances where it feels like somebody's really putting that on, and they feel like they have to. It doesn't feel like that with this.
I think it's, I mean, thanks, but I think it's just, I think it's a testament to the other actors were really great, and I loved working with them, and we got to play so much. So we didn't feel, he's like, Tim was like, I know I'm not Shakespeare, I'm not, oh gosh, my brain is terrible with names. The guy that did West Wing, and is always very strict about the dialogue. He's like, I'm not in that world.
Sorkin,
yeah. So he would just let us go, and we would often just riff. And so much of the dialogue in the movie is improvised, and he would always leave the take open at the end, sometimes for like 3 minutes. And we would just keep going. Eventually someone would be like, I think we're out of ideas. Can we just try that again? But it's, I get very excited though. So like I don't know if it's all my years of theater, but I am like a very calm, very sedentary person in my real life. But a second I step up on stage or I'm in front of the screen, it's like all that energy that I stored up is released. And I think I learned to do that by doing 8 shows a week on Broadway. You have to like kind of live like like a priest or a nun or something. You have to kind of like remove yourself from any situation that is going to deplete you of the finite amount of energy that you have within your body to give on stage, every performance.
Because you need all of it.
You need all of it. And I'm not one that's going to, even if I don't feel good, I can't not do a full thing. I can't not give 150%.
Yeah.
I'd be embarrassed if I didn't.
Yeah.
And I don't know that people would notice, but I would know. So I'm very much a perfectionist, as I'm sure most of these actors you talk to are. And but I'm a perfectionist with the knowledge that they will never be perfect, And I've had to learn throughout the years to let go of things. And doing film has always been really hard for me with that regard.
Why? What do you mean?
Well, you're on stage in theater, and
it's literally gone. It's literally gone.
It's literally the most transient thing ever. It's like those few people saw it, unless someone was trying to bootleg it, and if you suck, you do it again the next day, and if something didn't work, you try it a different way. If you didn't get the laugh, okay, whatever, you get another chance.
Right.
In film, it's, I guess maybe I'm just a little bit of a control freak. You try it a few different ways, you do some different takes, you try your lines, and you'll get the line right. You get as many takes as it takes to not mess it up. But at the end of the day, once you step off the set, unless you're like a producer, you're done, and somebody else sifts through it all and puts it together, and you're just kind of left hoping that it was good enough. And it's never good enough.
Right.
I mean, not for you.
Right.
I will say, and this is something that I have rarely said, that I was overall like happy after watching this, because I tend to cringe a little bit, but that's just because I know all the little things.
Right.
You remember what it was like on that day. You remember the insecurities that you had. You remember all this stuff. It's a really tricky profession, because we're all just a bunch of really sensitive people putting ourselves out there for the world to judge.
Yeah. Right.
and so like innately I'm like, well, if I judge myself first, then I won't be as effective when other people judge me. So I already know. Like, oh, you think that was good? Yeah, I knew that.
Yeah, I agree. I agreed last week. I knew that.
Yeah. Tell me something I don't know. Now, like, if somebody really likes it, I'll be like, oh, I'm pleasantly surprised.
Right.
It's a masochistic art form, that's for sure.
And you know what's interesting about this character in this movie? About a little more than halfway through it, I just thought to myself, I'm not sure I like this guy. No. But why do I want him to succeed? And it's something you're doing. I think it's you, man. I think if there was somebody else in this role that was just hitting this dead on and as this suave, charming guy who's rolling the dice so hard, I don't know if it would, if we would sustain as long. It's an epic. It's basically an epic. Would we sustain this and want to keep watching? I don't know.
It's funny because, well, two things. Because first of all, I talked to people that knew him. You know, it wasn't that long ago. He died in the 80s.
Yeah.
And I know people in my personal life that aren't associated with the movie that know him, and they're like, he was the fucking worst. But he made so many enemies. Yeah. Now, yes, he was a visionary.
Yeah.
But he pissed a lot of people off. I mean, he screwed people over. He spent a lot of money. He was addicted to drugs. He was addicted to gambling. And, you know, he hurt people.
Yeah.
And I think the second thing is that I think that I have something that Neil has, and innately, which is I can sort of charm my way out of situations if I'm lucky. Now that I've said it, it's a new universe, and I'll never charm my way out of anything ever again.
Yeah.
But I learned it because I think I learned it from doing theater and having to audition all the time. And I think when you don't have, when you walk into an audition room and you're not like super confident, because how can you be?
Yeah.
Because it's terrifying. I just revert to charm because I'm like, well, at least they'll like me. Right. And then that will prime them for liking this, you know?
Yeah, yeah.
And it's not something that doesn't work. Like, it works. And it's actually terrible now because everything is on tape.
Yes.
There's no in-person auditions anymore. And I'm like, I can't walk into a room and talk to somebody. I have to sit in my attic and drive my wife insane because I want to do 15 takes of a half-page scene.
Yeah.
Because I want to get it perfect. And it's like, it's actually kind of made me not like acting.
Ooh.
Not as a whole, but like,
no, I
dread getting an audition because I'm like, oh, I have to do this tape at home and I have to do that whole process. And, I can't.
I'm hearing this more than not.
Yeah, it's hard. And I really hope we get back to some form of in-person and personal kind of, auditions and stuff like that because, but the reason I got this role, I will say that the thing I was sort of getting at is that, Tim, this has been kicking around for years and years.
Yeah, I read about that, yeah.
And, they had to deal with Sony in it for whatever reason. I don't really know the details. It went away. Yeah. And so he was looking for a new guy, and he asked this guy named Larry Mark, who's one of our producers. He's also done Broadway, so he was a producer on The Greatest Showman. And he knew who I was, and he said, why don't you look up this guy on YouTube? And I do a lot of like singing concerts and stuff like that. Yeah. I'm a singer and performer, and I've done a lot of cabaret shows. And the thing about cabaret shows is that you're always kind of talking in between the songs. It's all about the stories in between. And and I was always terrified to do those. I put them off, even though I was successful in like a theater musical career. I put them off, even though I was getting offers and offers, until I basically like had a dry spell in my career, and I was like, oh, I need to make some money, so I guess I'll do that thing. But the reason I never wanted to do them is because I had to be myself on stage. And so it was all about being vulnerable and being, open to, because the thing that attracted me to acting was getting to be somebody else. Yeah, I mean, it's like, I feel like that's the main reason a lot of people do it, is like, I wasn't comfortable in my own skin, so I got to be other people. And then I got to experience life in a more full way, because then I felt that I could experience as myself. Yeah. And so I had to learn doing these cabarets how to be comfortable with being myself. Now, I think I also fabricated a little bit of a persona in that regard.
I was gonna say, probably
And,
did, right?
and so
There's a version of Jeremy on the stage.
yeah,
that
there's
you
a
were
version
playing.
of there's a version of Jeremy that's in front of an audience that always knows the right joke.
Yeah.
Then people are like, why don't you stand up? I was like, I am just going off the seat of my pants. And somehow I pull something out of my ass that makes you laugh. Do I think I could premeditate that? I don't know. And so I started getting really good at sort of charming an audience. And Tim went to watch a video, and I don't know what video he saw, but he watched the talking part before the song.
Yeah.
And he said, it wasn't you singing or anything that got me to like you. It was because I saw how you sort of pulled the audience's strings and sort of got them right in the palm of your hand and said that was what Neil did. He could he could talk anybody into anything. And he had this innate charm and this sort of like pull that you just kind of was like, okay, let's see what this guy can do, you know?
Right.
And so oddly, I think that's how I got the part. You know, of course, we talked about it, and I did like a table read, and then he gave it to me. And so like when I was, on set and as Neil, well, first of all, when you're wearing those clothes from the 70s and it's just like flashy, and that gives you a little bit of that sort of confidence. But I just had to remember why I got the part, and I would turn that button up and just kind of crank that knob up and up and up and up, and that always seemed to be the right avenue toward that character. And with a little bit of Tim mixed in, and a little bit of the interviews that I would watch, and knowing that I could kind of add as many fucks as I wanted to, which was really fun. I never got to do that in film. I spent too many years on the CW. I was like, I get to just say fuck anytime I want. This is awesome. We had to pull them back at times, and I was like, I don't know how you're gonna get clips for this show, like to put in a trailer or to advertise, for the movie. Like if I do any kind of appearance, like here's a clip from the movie, fuckity fuck 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 bleep bleep. I was like, well, sorry, it's like the fucking Wire. But but it was fun.
When I look at some of these videos you're talking about that Tim watched, of you on YouTube, and then I watched some of the reaction.
Did you see some of these videos? Or maybe did you see videos on YouTube?
Yes.
Or is this hypothetical?
No. I'm saying I did. I also watched some of like people reacting to those videos.
Oh my god, the reaction.
Have you watched those?
No, but
of course you can't admit you watched them.
I think I watched the first one because people were like, "What's this?" I was like, "I don't know what this is." They're like, "Did you see this?" I was like, "Obviously not. What is this?" And then it's just somebody like losing their mind, and I can't watch them because I know that there are imperfections in my video. And they're still reacting as if it's perfect.
Right.
And I know that it's not.
Right.
And so I don't
You don't want to be
believe them.
swayed. You don't want to be swayed.
And here's the other thing though, is that I remember the day that I did that. I remember the night that I did that performance.
Yeah.
Or the day that I shot that thing. And that memory holds so much more joy than watching it back.
Yeah.
And sitting and analyzing myself.
Yes.
Or having someone else experience it.
Yes.
Because I knew that I felt good in that moment.
Yeah.
And that is something that has taken me my whole career to kind of try and still am try to embrace. Because you have dark moments where you're just like, oh, maybe I'm just a fucking hack and fraud, and so it's tricky and it's hard not to sometimes, I stopped, quote unquote, I'm doing air fingers, reading reviews back in like 2018 was the last time I read a review. People will still send me shit. They're like, did you see this? I'm like, oh, well, you're sending it to me. It must be good. And there's like one good line and there's a bunch of like shit that they hated. And I'm like, what the fuck?
Wow.
Yeah, okay, yeah, there's one good thing in there, but I don't know if you realize that there could be 100 good things in there, and literally one word of negativity, and I will remember the one word negativity. Yeah. Don't send it to me. So, I've gotten okay with like watching myself, but watching other people react either positively or negatively.
Right, that's gonna be crazy.
Is I think, and the way that I've sort of come to rationalize it is that it degrades the specialness of the memory of doing that.
That's interesting. That's very interesting.
Because we only get to do a lot of these things once,
right?
Ever,
right?
I only got to do that cool scene in that movie one time,
right?
And it was great, and I'll never get to do that again. And people can watch it over and over and over and over and over and over and over again, but it's not the same as getting to do it.
Right.
So
right.
It's a mental game, and it's a lot of people. I mean, most people that I knew when I first came into the city as an actor are not doing it anymore because you have to develop defenses and then develop mechanisms to sort of deal with the, rejections and negativity. And then you have to develop your own ways of circumventing that. So you're not just walls and walls and walls and walls and walls and walls. Because when I first got to the city, I was just walls. So I was like, nothing's going to penetrate this, nothing is going to get through.
Yeah.
And
you felt like you needed that to protect yourself.
And then I realized very quickly that that they're going to get stuck, and then I'm going to not be able to break through when I'm acting or as a human being, because you have to remember, like, I also have to be a person at the end of the day. Like, I also have to interact with the world.
Yeah.
And if I'm just walled because I don't want to be rejected, well, what kind of life is that?
You're making me realize like that this is like, especially when you get probably to a certain place as a celebrity where you need those walls, otherwise your life is totally fucked, right? And yet realizing what you just said, that if you put up the walls, then you can't do your work.
Yeah. Well, you can't do your work, and you also can't be an authentic human being.
Yes.
You can't live in the world.
Right.
And so many people of celebrity, now listen, I am like, at the moment, like C-list maybe. I can imagine that you get to a certain level and you can't live in a life.
Right.
And that...
but then you're playing people with lives, and you need to access these tools.
Yeah, and
these things.
See, what's so crazy is, and I find it hard sometimes, even as an actor, seeing like a really, really, who I know to be like really wealthy or like really successful. You see on TV where they live or something, and then they're playing just some down and out, broken, like homeless person. I'm like, you're faking, you're fake, that's fake, that's fake. It's hard not to do that.
Right.
I always try to keep my personal life as personal as possible. Maybe for that reason, but also to protect the sanctity of that.
Right. And
to sort of be able to have that be separate from any sort of judgment that I get as an actor or performer.
Right. Well, it's got to be weird in the theater, because it's almost like every time you open that door, it's like the premiere of a movie every night where you got fans outside.
Yeah.
So every single night is the premiere. You know what I mean? Like, it's the first time
about,
they're
like, coming out the stage door.
Yeah. And that's the first time they've seen that event. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then you have to deal with like the celebration every night.
Yeah, it becomes like a second job. And I mean, I don't... If you know me, you know that I'm not very good at stage dooring. I just like, I get anxious and I get nervous around like a whole lot of people. And I've gotten better at it, but I will say that it was during COVID was kind of a welcome reprieve, because we weren't allowed to talk to anybody afterwards. And I'd leave the theater and I'd be like, oh my God, they're like, can I have I'm so sorry, COVID. Can we take a picture? I'm so sorry. It's just, I don't want to, I have to test. I have to do the tests. I can't. We test every other day. If I get it, I have to go out of work for 10 days. I can't do that. I'm so sorry. How'd you like the show?
You're the guy who wanted the pandemic to keep going.
No, I didn't.
Kidding.
Well, it's still, I mean, now it's like they're still testing, and shows are. I mean, Broadway, it's kind of where my world is. Like, it affected it really negatively. A lot of shows couldn't stay open because people kept getting sick, and they kept having to cancel shows.
Yes.
It was rough.
Yes. Talk to me about this final monologue in this movie. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
This is this had to be hard to do, and it made me think about some of the times that I was watching some of the songs you did on YouTube and these things, right? And every time a performer does a song, you should think that it's a storytelling event. I think, right?
100%. I don't care if you're a pop singer or anything
Exactly.
else. Well, maybe, I mean, I don't know. Maybe it doesn't matter as much for that,
But you really feel like it is when it's good and when somebody's giving it to us and there's, you know what I mean? And
yeah.
and I feel like there's a similarity in this monologue or in monologues in general where it's like, I mean, and I'm just curious if you approach it like that. Do you approach it like you would the song, where there's ebbs and flows,
Yes.
and they're very, very minimal.
Yes.
But you have to kind of hit those.
Every moment that you're performing should be a part of a story, and you should have the overall arc of the story within you at all times. Now, this is like a major lesson in the stage, and it's a lot harder to do, I think, in film. Easier to do in this monologue you're talking about because it's literally one shot, like a slow
Right.
zoom, and so like I can do the whole thing right there. But I mean, it's you know, it's definitely something that I've learned, especially doing like a lot of solo performances, is that there's nothing else to look at. Mm-hmm. You know, when you spend a lot of time on stage, you can't cut away to like a cool shot of a, you know, someone sniffing blow or lighting a cigarette. Like, you can't do that. You know, you have to tell the whole story with the very limited amount of materials you're given, which are words and your body, or you know, your chest up, I guess, on film.
Yeah.
So it's like,
Yeah.
I mean, you really, for me, I mean, anytime that there's something like that, I very consciously think about, where am I starting and where am I ending? How is it different? And what's changed? And what is the most sort of dynamic, interesting way of getting there? Because you could kind of do it all one thing and let the words do all of the work. And sometimes that's okay. Sometimes that is all that is needed. But I felt like for this moment at the end of the film, like, it was just like something that was, I remembered when I read it the first time. And I think that was important for me, because I remembered sort of sitting back in my chair being like, oh, shit. And I needed to I had the, you know, urge to replicate that, hopefully for the viewer and the audience.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
and, you know, it was, I definitely do think of things with arcs and full storylines, and I'm the biggest advocate. I mean, I will sometimes, you know, teach master classes to young performers, and it's always my biggest note when I'm coaching somebody, which is like, where are you starting? Where do you end? And what are all the different things you try in the middle to get there? And how dynamic can you make it so that it's compelling and we're with you and we're surprised and we're, you know, following you because we don't quite know what's going to happen. And but whatever you're saying and however you're saying it makes us feel like we could be you as well. And I think the great thing about Neil, that hopefully I was able to convey, is that he can pull you right in and make you experience his emotion with him. And you know, watching videos of him before, and I don't know if you and your screener got the version where they have videos of him at the end during the credits.
Yes.
But
Yes.
he still has that sort of magnetism. You're just like, what is this guy?
Yeah.
What's going on in there? And how is he? So yeah, I don't know. Hope that answers your question.
You said this in an interview that I wrote down, and I wanted to end this by talking about this.
Okay, sure.
When your daughter was born, you said, that you thought she took a piece of you, and this is the way you say it, because I felt less of myself. But what I realized is that it's not less. It opened me up so that I can join the rest of the universe. It feels like your heart spills out of your chest. It's not contained anymore. Suddenly it takes up every ounce of space between you and those that you love. It's in every particle of air. It's always been that way, but you didn't realize it until you're met with a love like this. I'm bringing this up because I want to know if, like, now that you know this, now that you've been met with this realization, are you able to use this in your art? Like, you know what I mean? Are you able, can you talk about this? Are you able to spill this out?
Well, the thing that you paraphrased, but still fairly close to what I probably said, was the final moment of a show that I created about my daughter. And I had never really talked so personally, like in a public setting with audience. And I tried to create this show that I did right before the pandemic called Carry On, where I, sort of confronted why I was the way I was and how I could be better. And it was kind of through the lens of having a kid. And I never faced a lot of things in my past until I had a kid. It wasn't until I sat there kind of looking at her, watching her grow up, and then remembering things that I had packed away deeply from my own childhood that I never had a therapist or never talked to about anything or never was able to sort of like voice it at that age. And then I see them, and this is, somewhat, embellished, but I see it sort of happening to my kid. And I'm like, I can't allow that. So that's like the first sort of step of, oh, this person is so much more important than I could ever be. And, that's like an over embellishment, and that's, kind of your sort of brain running away from you. But at the same time, you're like, oh, overprotection mode. But then you sort of realize, well, what's actually happening to me? What's actually happening is that my heart is opening up. And as someone who has gone through a lot of traumatic things, especially when I was a kid, I closed off all of these compartments of myself. And she was the key to unlocking them. Without having to do anything except be there and be open and available to love. And the great thing about kids is that they are a clean slate.
Yeah.
And they don't have any sort of anything preventing them from feeling until it's laid upon them at some stage. And you see it, I already see it happening. I'm seeing her put up walls because something happened at the pool or something happened at school, or I might have been, a little harsh with her in one thing. So like I see her doing that, and I feel that openness slipping away. But when she was really little, I had that glimpse of freedom, and it made me want to just sort of open myself up more. And so I was able to kind of access feelings and I think release a lot of stuff that I didn't even realize I was holding on to in that process. And it was really a gift that she gave me that she didn't even know, And I recorded that show that I wrote for her, and I with the thought that maybe one day when she's older I'll play it for her and say like, this was the gift you gave me by being in my life. And I just get emotional thinking about it because I've never been more of an emotional person than any time I talk or think about my daughter. And as someone who has difficulty accessing his emotions, which we've talked about earlier, it has unplugged that sort of thing.
Amazing.
So it's like another thing that I've said kind of in tangent with that speech, and I think I probably said it around that, is that you feel like somebody takes a part of you because you're like, it almost at the beginning feels like something's missing because I don't feel completely myself anymore. So I'm like, what's wrong? Why does that feel like it's missing? And then what I sort of painted for myself is that it's not that something's missing. You are literally taking the plug out.
And you thought the
That
plug
stopped.
was yourself.
Yeah,
You thought
that stopped you up.
Right.
And so that's the whole spilling into the universe and
Yeah.
spilling out into the world. And it's like, oh, this was actually the thing that was holding me back. You took that away from me. So yeah, I am missing something, but
Right.
it's not something that I ever needed or wanted.
Right. And that's the hard thing, right? Because you think that that's you.
Yeah.
You think that that has the characteristics of you.
Yeah.
In
Oh,
it.
yeah.
And
If
you're
you-
thinking
if-
you're losing you.
Yeah. If you're like, yeah, well, how do you describe yourself? Yeah, I'm pretty quiet. I'm pretty introverted,
Yeah.
I don't like really put myself out there in the world very much, like, it doesn't
Yeah.
have to be that way,
Right, right,
And I,
right.
I'm not saying that I've changed, fundamentally as a human, but let go of a lot of things for sure, and replaced it with love for a human being that I didn't know was even possible.
Right.
And not
right.
to say that I haven't loved people. I love my family. I love my wife.
Yeah.
I even love myself, but not like that.
Yeah.
And
And this love also then just is something that you can give too, right? Even though it's the love for that
Yeah.
person,
yeah,
that you're able to give that.
yeah,
Right?
I'm able to access it. If you can access something, you're able to replicate it. You're able
Yeah.
to transfer it.
Yeah.
You're able to sort of, use it hopefully for the greater good.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I do feel like in the past few years I have, and I've gone through peaks and valleys because it gets scary, and so you might do something drastic or something stupid
Yeah.
because you're like, I can't. Oh, no, this is not no. And then you're like, okay, I did that. Okay, but ultimately I've really grown a lot as a person. Started going to therapy. That was helpful because I was always a person like, I don't need therapy. I understand. I know what they're gonna tell me.
Yeah.
I've already diagnosed myself. Like, I'm just gonna talk about something that I already know.
yeah.
That was always my view because I had gone a couple times as like a young adult, and I was like, blah blah blah. But I think I finally gave in. But yeah, it's definitely opened me up, and I've talked a little bit about it that it's made me a better actor too, because I have so much more to draw from. And I have a wider scope of appreciation for things. And as an actor, if you don't appreciate things, nothing has value.
Yes.
And when you're acting and when you're portraying a character, that character has to reflect the world, right? Yes. It's like when you're watching somebody on screen and their eyes are closed the whole time. Or you're on stage and someone's kind of like not moving their body. They're closing off the world to you as an audience member. Mm-hmm. And so you have to be able to open yourself up so that the world can be let in and experience it with you. And that's, I think, the beautiful thing about, film and theater is, as an audience member, when you watch something that's good and compelling, you are experiencing it yourself. Without having all the tools of an actor and all the training,
Right.
You're experiencing it there with them, and you're crying or laughing. And if you don't have things accessible to you as the person that is the conduit for that experience, then you're not going to be able to deliver it in as full of a way.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Jeremy Jordan, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Back to One is a production of Filmmaker Magazine, which is a publication of The Gotham, formerly IFP. Listen to back episodes of this podcast at filmmakermagazine.com or wherever you get your podcasts.